I collected my thoughts and whisked the bottle off the wooded surface, cradling it on the way across the room to the other furniture with the glassware strewn upon it. Setting the jar down next to a large mortar and pestle, I looked around the cluttered area until I found a good-sized wooden box nestled neatly towards the back, underneath one of the larger shelves. I slid the hefty cask out from underneath the shelf and lifted it up to place it directly in front of me. The top was coated with dust, proving to me just how long I'd been working on my plan. With a satisfied smirk, I unlatched the small hinge in the front and slowly lifted the lid. Several jars, wraps, and cases of ingredients stared up at me amidst the red felt lining of the box. I carefully glanced over each and every little specimen, nodding my head to myself whilst watching the jar with the mushrooms still sitting inside. Everything was accounted for. It was finally time to begin. I set to work immediately, sliding the case off to the side and throwing every paper in my way towards the back of the table. With a cleared space, I reached up to open the wooden cabinet above with a creaking groan from its hinges. Reaching in, I grasped a white leather book with extremely worn binding, gently placing it upon the table before me and closing the door. I flipped the cover over to reveal a page nearly torn apart from the scribbled writing on it. It was completely illegible, and luckily not the one I needed. I began to search through the tattered parchment until I happened upon a much, relatively neater sheet. There were light sketches and images of instructions, handwritten by me several moons ago, still freshly imprinted for me to follow. I had written this very recipe way back at the beginning, around the same time I had visited Spitefire Solace. The scripture felt so dated and old, yet still looked as if I had just inscribed it the day before. I glanced over the ingredients and directions again, reaching to grab my mortar and pestle. I laid the tools out to my right and picked up the book, leaning it against a big flask to stand it up straight. Eagerly, I scraped the big wooden box back towards me. I reached inside to grab everything and set it on the table, one piece at a time. The ingredients were neatly labeled across their containers, making it easy to arrange them. I picked through each ingredient slowly, checking to make sure all were there. With a wide smirk among my face, I gripped my hands together and rubbed them lightly in anticipation, while looking to the first step in the book. I popped the cork off 2 bottles and gently laid the dried herbs inside the dull gray stone bowl before me, gripping the pestle tightly, working it around the curved inside to crush them into a fine dust. Having combined the 2 together perfectly, I lifted the bowl to dump the mixture into another container, reaching for a vial of slag water next. The herbs sizzled and popped as I doused them in the orange-tinted liquid, almost as if melting into it. Using a stone spoon, I stirred the liquid rapidly inside until it frothed, then pouring it into my glass retort. It bubbled and churned on its own inside the vessel, a bright reddish moisture slowly forming at the top and dripping down the spout. Despite only being started on the task, I couldn't help but smile as I watched the curious reaction occur. I watched it intently for a short bit, shaking my head to regain my focus shortly after. I had to keep my mind on track, no matter how eager I was to fulfill this lifelong dream. One misstep, and something could go horribly wrong. That thought alone snapped my conscious mind into a pure state of attention. The fire behind me burned hot through the night as I carefully continued to add more and more ingredients, as per my written recipe. Vials and tubes of muck water, dragon's drool, elemental essence, charred oak, witchberry, iron leaf, and many others passed through my hands into their respective places, each one creating their own unique reaction when mixed with another. I watched as the dragon's drool sparked inside my crucible, along with the iron leaf, sending bright red sparks around the inside of the receptacle, a bright cloud of deep red smoke seeping upwards as the two combined into one. It gave me a very light sense of pleasure to watch my work coming to such vibrant life, letting me know everything was working according to plan. I took a deep breath in, the red smoke lightly seeping into my nose with a very metallic tint of scent to it, almost like being next to a smelting forge at the blacksmith's shop. I turned to look at the fire behind me for a second after, a startling image appearing before my eyes. I watched as a single flame began to grow wildly before my eyes, moving higher and higher from the pit as it stretched upwards. It formed into shape very rapidly, a humanoid form. It was a female body, with glowing yellow hair flowing softly to the side as it stared at me directly. Moving with the fire itself, she danced seductively before me, a light change of color, most likely a smirk, appearing on her facial area. She swayed her hips with the flames below, reaching a hand out towards me, begging me to come hither. I slowly released my hands from the table and turned to face her. She arched her back soothingly in one final burst of light before dissipating, her form quickly breaking apart into darkness. I stared towards the pit for what felt like hours, unsure of what I had just witnessed. A sign of some sort? An illusion? Perhaps a spell? It was unlike anything I had ever seen. I looked back at the table, the ingredients all still mixing in their proper vessels. Perhaps it was just an effect of one of those. I took a moment to regain my composure and returned my hands to the table, turning back to face the book again. I was so close to being finished by now, I couldn't stop here, no matter what. I worked through the rest of the night, unbeknownst to me. Time seemed to stand still at my workstation, yet outside, the sun was gracing the treetops with its gentle rays already. With a heavy sigh, I looked at the mixture of liquids before me, all combined with cautious anticipation in their own little jars. To my right, the last ingredient of it all, the Eldspar mushroom. Victoriously, I gripped the jar and released the cork from it again, tipping it over the mortar to drop it in. I circled the bowl with the pestle, breaking it apart into a mushy light green paste. A little douse of spring water and some stirring after, it grew thin, yet dark like a murky bog filled with dirt and debris. I set the bowl down and reached across the table on my right, grabbing a large clear glass flask with a wide brim. This was it, the culmination of all my research, all my work, all my trials. I picked each mixture up individually and poured the contents into the larger vessel, watching the solution change color and texture with each addition. Upon adding the Eldspar and spring water in last, the potion within changed to a deep blood red color, yet gave off a dark blue smoke that gently dispersed out from the top of the large container. It had no distinct smell, almost untraceable, odd considering the amount of extremely fragrant ingredients I had used. I picked the flask up by the neck and swirled it around in my hands, watching it as it hypnotically flowed around the sides of the bottle. Despite being a test, this had produced a larger amount than I had suspected. But this was a good thing to me. There was no telling how much would be needed to have a proper effect. I reached up to open the cupboard above again, this time on the opposite side, grasping a small, round bottom clear vial. Carefully, I funneled some of the new potion into the little urn, enough to fill the bottom completely. I stopped and set the larger glass down, making sure to place a new thick cork in its neck, sealing in the blue and red colors. I took a step back from my table and stared into the small container, a light smile forming on my face as I immediately moved towards the stairs. I crept back up the dank steps and opened the hidden passageway quickly, climbing above before having it seal off yet again. The candles on the table continued to burn brightly, giving me enough light to make the small walk over to my bed. Feeling suddenly exhausted, I turned and sat on the soft, hay-filled sack, grunting as I bent my knees. There was only one thing left to do now. I looked closely at the little vial. It was time. I brought the edge to my lip, tilting it and my head quickly as the liquid rushed into my mouth, causing an almost stinging sensation within. I swallowed the entirety of the bottle as quickly as I could, letting out a loud gasp and wiping my beard off immediately after finishing it. There would be no way to describe the taste in any common tongue of the world. It was sweet yet bitter, cold but hot, a complete set of opposites in every which way. I set the vial down on my nightstand nearby, feeling a suddenly bit drowsy. Without even removing my robe, I leaned back on the bed, my head laying on top of the feather-filled burlap pillow, my mind racing wildly. Almost immediately, I shut my eyes and fell into a deep, deep sleep.